Afternoon, everybody. This is a meeting of the Devon Jurisdiction Framework Committee. Today is Wednesday, June 11th, 2029. My name is Victor Norman. I will chair this meeting. I'll now call the roll. Janice Livingston.
Here.
Robert Putbrier.
Here.
Susan Mary Redinger.
Here.
Dan Nason. Brian Sawyer. Logan Breeze. Brian Hildebrand. Bill Marshall.
Here.
Neil Angus.
Here.
John Cater. Odile Smith. Ryan Divot. Christian Cullen. There is a majority. We have a quorum. We are in order. We have minutes from our meeting of May 14th, 2025. Now, although we have a quorum, the Devens contingency is not officially represented at this meeting. We had an informal agreement early on that if not all of the stakeholders were present, we could conduct business but not vote, not take any votes. So I'm going to defer approval of the minutes until our next meeting.
Give me some feedback so they're corrected in the next packet.
Sure.
Under absent, you can take Rich Maori off. He's no longer the representative. I've replaced him. John Cater is listed up above and below, I believe. And Karen Davis is listed twice under absent. And Bill Marshall, I just heard his name. I don't see him on this unless I'm missing it, but I'm not sure where he belongs.
Well, first, let's go back. Who was there at the meeting? Is everyone who was there indicated here?
I believe so, but I'm just going off of.
Yeah, the absent list needs to be scrubbed because Karen Davis is not a member of the committee. Rich Maori. Yeah, well, Logan took the minutes
From the video.
from the video,
Which
and
would
maybe it
never
was.
mention Karen Davis.
Might have been an old template.
Yeah,
Probably.
Karen Davis is on maybe is on a mailing list or something that picked that up. Okay, any other?
And I just noticed too, the minutes recorded and submitted by Logan, so he did do that on the video then? Is that
Correct,
right?
yeah.
Okay. Great.
Yes.
Okay.
Okay, so we'll bring these minutes back at our next meeting. Stakeholder reports, Town of Air.
Mr. Chair, no update at this time.
Town of Harvard, the Harvard Devens Jurisdiction Committee did meet last month on May 19th. We discussed the work of the Jurisdiction Committee. We talked about the taxation submission to the framework matrix. We discussed the work of the housing group and agreed to meet in June. Is there anything else, Susan Mary, that we need to report? Okay, Town of Shirley.
We do not have anything new to report.
No, there are no Devens representatives here. Devens Enterprise Commission.
Similarly, the Devens Enterprise Commission discussed at their last meeting the taxation issue, so we'll bring that up later. Just heads up for everybody and a courtesy invite. In a couple of weeks on June 24th will be the DEC's 30th anniversary. 1995, June 22nd was the first meeting of the Devens Enterprise Commission. So I'd love to invite you all to a little celebration that we're having on Devens near the intersection of Patton and Jackson Road. It'll be at 11 a.m. June 24th. Special folks attend and have a little celebration there, so hope you all can join us. Similarly, we're doing our regional farmers market again this year. The first date is June 24th. So lots happening on June 24th on Devens.
Very good. The next item under old business is a letter to Mass Development yet another invitation to rejoin. Now, what I'd like to suggest to the committee is that we can discuss this letter, but again, I think we have to defer. I believe we have to defer sending it until the Devens representatives are present. So Robert and Susan Mary, this is your work.
So, Mr. Chair, members of the framework group, I want to thank Susan Marie for all of her help and input. As discussed at several of the meetings, when we were at a point that the RFP for the financial study was in complete form, we were going to have the framework committee send a letter to Mass Development in asking them to re-engage with us using also the RFP as one of the key items to come back to the table. So you have in your packet the draft that Susan Marie and I put together. It basically, the four major reasons that are stressed is, the issue of time of the essence with, 2033 just around the corner. The second point, that the framework committee has completed an RFP for the financial analysis, of which Mass Development should be at the table and is a key piece of that. Third point, all of the recent developments that we are aware of and have talked about, issues involving the housing and development caps, the recent recommendations of the governor's task force on the future of housing, the impending date of 2033. There's a lot going on, as Neil said, up at Devens, that now is a critical time for all the stakeholders to be at the table. And then really number four, that the working collaboratively with all of the stakeholders at the table is perhaps the best prescription for success. And we had Mass Development at the table for quite some time, and they were a leader in that capacity in providing resources, and they need to come back. So I know that we can't vote on the letter, but we're open to any suggestions, concerns, questions on the letter.
Any comments, questions, additions, subtractions? I just have one, and I take issue, and I may be way off track here, with one word in the letter, and that is the second paragraph, which says the lack of involvement, meaning Mass Development, since then has stymied the efforts. I think stymied's too strong a word. I think we've actually accomplished quite a bit. Does anyone agree with me?
I think that we want the strong word.
Okay.
Thwarted the efforts to move collaboratively forward with that.
Now that just sounds rude.
Worded is hindered.
I think hindered is maybe a little softer. I wouldn't want to give the impression to anybody that we've not done anything, because I know we have accomplished quite a bit.
But at the same time, don't we want to get the message across that we need them back? And that because they are stymieing us, because there's only so far we can go, right?
They may feel that the decision not to attend the meetings has been the right decision because they've been successful in stymieing us. And why not continue that?
I mean, is to prevent or hinder the progress of, so.
Okay,
Hinder.
I withdraw.
We got
You
a
said there's
thesaurus
one.
out, so-
Okay, I withdraw my objection. So, okay, good letter. So we'll bring that back at our next meeting.
And I just have to say, Robert did the lion's share. I had 5% of English major tinkering, but Robert, great job.
Greatly appreciate it. No, thank you for your collaboration.
Yeah.
Appreciate it.
No, thank you.
And Neil, thank you.
Okay, also under old business, a letter to EOHLC, Chris Kletchman. that, a letter was sent, because we agreed at our last meeting that Neil was to make some edits suggested by the committee and that the letter was to be sent, and it was. And so what I've included today is the letter itself. And then an email that I sent covering the letter and Chris Clutchman's response. And the response is noteworthy in two respects. One, that it is suggesting that we submit another application, which is consistent with her representations in the past, and also provided us with a contact person. For what it's worth, I'd made contact with Christian Bell. Got off to a bad start when I referred to her as Bell, but I did apologize and corrected that. Subsequently followed up with her asking when the next submission deadline was and if they ever made exceptions. I've not heard back on that score. So the invitation to submit, there was a deadline of June 4th, which was between our meetings, and I got a very limited response from the committee in terms of how we might put an application together. I think, although historically AIR has been able to put together applications overnight, that wasn't to be the case here.
Right, we don't have our new economic development person starts July 1st, so we're a little short-handed on that quick turnaround this time.
Okay.
I'd like to make a suggestion that what we do when we have all the voting members is that we come up with a plan. So if we're ever in a situation like this, you know, hey, fill out an application, that we somehow are able to move quicker so that maybe we can. Be it that we just say, hey, so-and-so submit one, and then we'll go from there, or we could even have a quick meeting in order to, but we should come up with a better plan so that we can, you know, because we could probably do a quick Zoom so that nobody had to try to get in here or something, to be able to say, hey, you know, here's the opportunity, here's the deadline. If we're going to do something, we need to move quick. That way we don't miss out on opportunities.
So, authorize and sunset to just do it and send it, provisional vote to be taken at the next meeting, and which, if it's not, we're gonna keep it full.
Mhm.
Contingency plan grants.
Right.
Yeah.
Maybe as a future discussion topic when everyone's here.
That's a good idea.
So I sense that there is support for submitting another application. Is that?
Yes.
I would just say, Mr. Chair, that if we are submitting a grant, we should do it in mass development back at the table. Depending on the grant, that type of grant you're applying for, but without mass development at the table, I think we're just spinning our wheels, and we run the risk of getting in the same situation we were in with the last round grant, where, you know, we weren't ready to accept the money. Well, that's the reason why we're doing the RFP. Number one is so that when mass development comes back to the table, we're ready to go and have their participation. But without their participation, we ask for money and they're not involved. We can't, is there much we can still do? That's my only concern.
Seemed to me, reading the RFP, that what you need from them is information, a lot of which you're able to now get. That's from my understanding, at least from being on the jurisdiction committee. There's a fair amount of information that's available, and they've been forthcoming with others. Whether or not they're going to participate, I don't know, but it seems as if the direction provided in the RFP, as I read it, is something that could be moved forward on should the towns come up with a way of funding it.
Yeah.
I'm not sure who's gonna finally pull mass development to the table, but if work continues to proceed I would imagine that they'd like to get involved at some point.
I mean, they have to be.
Right.
It's required.
Right.
But it's not required until 2030 officially, right? But, I think we're doing what we can in the meantime without them. But we get to a point where, you know, there's not much further we can go without their cooperation. And I just want to be sure we don't go too far down a road and then get awarded a grant and not have the opportunity to utilize it because mass development is still not at the table.
So, you brings up a good point, but when we got the grant last year, that was so that we could get the RFP out and find a consultant to start working on some of these issues that, you know, each town and even the Devens working group were coming up with to start to build a report, which, you know, then we would, you know, also get mass development. So therein lies a bigger problem. Mass development has indicated they don't want to come back until a few years from now. So do we miss out on, I mean, you brought up a good point, but if they're not going to come back to the table until 2030, which they have kind of, you know, or even 28, the 2 years before the 2030 date, I don't know what date they decided on. Do we miss out on opportunities to start building a report that would then feed into the big report once we got mass development onto the report? Because that's the idea, is that it would then feed into the old thing so that when it went to the Senate to get voted on, it had everything. So that's where we have to ask then, what is this committee doing? Because again, they've stymied us. If we're not going to be able to, because he's brought up a good point, but if we don't submit for grants so that we can try to get forward, you know, even, you know, hey, we managed to get a whole chapter on, I don't know, municipal budgeting or whatever, to be able to feed into the bigger report, then what are we doing? Do we then just come back in a few years? And then it turns into a rush job. So
I would just be cognizant of any grant, like, and this can be, we can figure this out as we go forward, but cognizant of, and be careful with any grant that we are applying for, that it can be go towards work that we as a group can do without mass development at the table. Realizing they're not, unless they come back to the table. But if they're not at the table, we need to make sure that the grant funds that we pursue are able to be expended without their participation, and will still be productive and not just wasting everyone's time, right?
right, and that was the purpose of last year's grant, is that, you know, that was, you know, we you know, Eldridge says, you know, quick.
Yep.
And, you know, Alan, bless his heart, managed to fill it out and get it approved like that. And then we had it, and then we were moving towards something. And then, you know, everything kind of went haywire because the state got involved. And so.
There was a meeting, I think, Neil, you may have been there, Robert, you were there in Boston.
I was there last August, yeah.
Yeah, no, okay. There were Secretary of Economic Development and the Secretary of Housing and Livable Communities were both there? Or their staff, high-level
The
staff?
staff was, the secretary at the time was there of livable communities.
Okay.
Secretary Howe, who I don't believe is the secretary now.
No. So they, along with Senator Eldridge, encouraged submission of an application. And they made it a very strong encouragement to submit an application, and hence the town of Air stepped in. Alan Minoyan did an astounding job of putting it together, meeting the deadline. We were awarded the grant, and it was a very broad scope, leading towards making final decision of permanent government. This committee deliberated and came up with what ultimately resulted in the draft RFP that we now have. That's how we would use that money. So Neil, I think what you're suggesting guess I'm not really sure, but why not submit another application if the circumstances are the same? I mean, EOHLC encouraged us to submit an application just under the same circumstances as last time. We know what we would use it for. And Susan Mary's right that we've got a lot of raw data from mass development, financial data. We need to put a finer point on it. And we really, theoretically, mass development could right now satisfy the scope in the RFP. But what we really need is a professional objective analysis of their submission to give it credibility.
And that's fine. I just want to make sure we're cognizant of the fact that they're
Yeah.
still not at the table, and whatever grant funding we do apply for, if it's for this financial analysis still, if it's for something else, that it's something that can be accomplished with the information we're able to obtain
Okay.
without mass developments
Well, the only thing that
at the
mitigates,
table.
mitigates that is that we are submitting a very strong letter to mass development to get them re-engaged.
Yep.
And hopefully that'll work. It's a different regime, if you will, in Boston. This will be a test of whether they're continuing the policies of the past or whether they're changing them. And also, I think if we do get a grant from a state agency, and, you know, the letters were, both my letter to Chris Clutchman and her response were copied to the delegation. So they're in the loop. And I think the thinking, with my recollection, was that if mass development isn't cooperating, that we would turn to them and say, look, your state agency, one state agency gave us a grant and another state agency doesn't want to cooperate. Is there something you can do about this? So
Right.
that would be my argument.
Well, I would imagine if there's money on the table, it's a leverage and an incentive for mass development to re-engage. If they know that monies are being expended on the moving forward of something, I would think that they would want a voice at the table.
It would seem so. Yeah.
Mr. Chair, this is what
Rami?
I would sort of propose, we'll call it the grant pathway, because there's a bunch of moving pieces, and I have an update on another piece to it. So I think in no particular order, breaking it down, as Selectman Livingston brought up and others, a future discussion topic should be about a grant contingency plan. So in the event of tight deadlines, we have some type of pathway. That's sort of a generic. The second thing is, we know from both last August from the secretary at the time, but also since then, when Neil and I met sort of impromptu with Chris Clutchman a few months ago, both times it's been indicated that there would be future funding sources for this type of, for this financial study. So one of the things I would volunteer, if there is an objection for the next time, I will, and maybe perhaps Neil would be willing to join me, to talk to Chris Clutchman in more detail to some other folks at the state about some specifics on a potential funding source for this, because we got to find that anyhow. And that a specific grant or specific funding source will then sort of govern timeline and so forth on this, right? Then hopefully when we next meet, the authorization will be there. Unfortunately, not today to send the letter to mass development with the RFP. I think that's a key piece to get them back to the table as sort of next steps. The other thing that I want to offer up, as we've discussed before, is obviously the particular grant we did originally receive, we couldn't use for this, but we had a decision, I will say, outside of the framework. The option was, do we send the $300,000 back to EOHC, or do the towns and others use the grant for some other aspect? Now, from what we understand from the state, and I know we're going to get into it, there's 4 recommendations from the housing group that it sounds like they were going to either use this money for part of that. if not all of those four. I don't think there's enough. But I feel it's better that we're at the table in some form. I'm not saying the framework group to drive that. The first issue is the issue and the recommendation about the schools and education. So myself, the town administrator from Shirley, Neil, the town administrator from Harvard, have indicated that we would like there to be a study done on the issue of education, using some of that money, because I think that would be beneficial for everyone. And specifically, my notes in talking to the superintendent of schools from Harvard and from the Air Shirley Regional District, there were sort of 5 general components of this study. One would be an updated enrollment study and analysis. The second would be a school building assessment on the issue of schools and the future of schools, an issue of capacity of students, transportation, and then the financial viability of any recommendations. So rather than either have the 300,000 go to some other part of the state or just completely go to whatever they're going to do, in full disclosure, we felt that we should at least get the school piece of those 4 recommendations done with input from the towns and the superintendents. So while we're doing that, as I said, just to get back, for next time, I will do some, unless there's objection or anybody can join me, let me talk in detail with not only Chris Fletchman, but a couple of the state agencies to find the fit for this, because we know with the RFP, I think there's 2 key pieces for this. One is obviously we need some funding. And secondly, ideally, and hopefully, hope springs eternal, that Mass Development would join us on that project. So does that sound like a plan? So
This is more of a clarification than on the educational piece.
Mhm.
Who would be driving that bus
unintended or not.
in reality?
In reality, it would be the 3 town administrators, the director from DEC, and the 2 superintendents of schools and their respective staffs.
And the town administrator of Air.
Yes,
You
Air.
forgot yourself.
That
Robert.
happens, yeah, yeah.
How does that sit with everybody?
Well, I mean, the framework group made the decision not to, what it wanted to do with respect to this money. And the state had clearly said that we could not use it for the financial RFP. So the concern is we had a choice at that point. The 300,000 goes back to the state at large, whether it's Plymouth or North Adams, wherever, or whatever they want to do with it. They are looking to do the 4 recommendations in the housing report. There's 4 areas. There's the school piece. There's a larger planning piece for Devens. There's a building assessment for Devens, which I think a huge piece of it will be not just Vicksburg Square, and then a community outreach component.
Well, there was also the parking and traffic.
Parking and traffic, right.
Assessment.
Yeah. Of all of those, which they are driving the bus on, the education one was felt that should be driven, to use your term, on the local level out here.
Okay, so what would be, under that scheme, what would be the role of this committee?
So my understanding, in general, was that that this committee, would not want to use those funds. And, because obviously, as we discussed, it was not part of the charge of what we considered this committee's charge was. And so I think what Robert has said is, rather than giving that money back completely, You know, even though this committee's charge, you know, would not benefit from those particular studies or looking into education, I do think it would be beneficial, you know, definitely to the town of Shirley, and I believe the other two towns and, you know, Devens Enterprise Commission. And so that was kind of the thinking is I do think it would bring a benefit to the towns and the Devens community. It just didn't fit the exact charge of this committee.
Yeah, I don't think there's any question that education is a big piece in permanent government, and having an analysis, useful analysis would be helpful. But again, what would this committee be asked to do?
There's no, I don't think
There's
there's
no
any
ask
ask.
at this time. It's
This
just
committee
enough.
already voted and said
Outside
no,
of-
Yeah.
thank you, but we're,
Okay.
we're not
All
using
right.
money for that. So the money is, I guess, able to be reallocated.
Okay. All right.
It was granted to the town of Air and apparently the Devens Enterprise Commission as well. So we would, you know, since the DGFC did not accept it, we would look at utilizing those funds for a regional purpose, which I think goes to the disposition question anyways. Education is a big part of the disposition discussion. So I think it's a great use of,
So could this committee expect to get the final report and periodic reports as the work progresses? Is that reasonable?
yeah, we
Okay.
we have
Shareholders
several
in that.
members that are
Right.
gonna be part
Yeah.
of it, so
Okay.
we can certainly give regular updates as things go, I would assume. And yeah, everybody will get the final report.
Okay, so
It's a win-win.
yeah, I think that's fine. But then as to, you know, a separate application for future funding, Robert, you're going to,
So, right, so
Go on the
with
funds.
that, so then because I know we have other issues, move on. So for our purposes, for framework purposes, next steps in the realm of grants. One is myself and others can join me before the next time we meet. I will do some further work in communicating with some of the state agencies, including Ms. Kletchman, about a potential grant or funding source that would fit the RFP. So we have some further shape that. Secondly, as Janice brought up, I think for future discussion when everyone's here, is coming up with a grant sort of fast track contingency plan. So like what you have brought up, you know, with that June 4th. So we have a plan for the future. And that's sort of what I propose for next steps. And then we'll keep you updated on the education piece.
all right, so that, okay. And we'll keep, under old business, we'll keep the communication between this committee and EOHLC. Hopefully I'll hear back from Mackenzie Bell in terms of another deadline. So that will remain on the agenda. And then we'll see how this other entity works with the education
Yep.
work. And then in terms of the other consultant needs under the working group study, that's somebody else's hunt at this point, Neil. Is that your understanding? The building analysis, the parking study, all that stuff, how's that going to get accomplished? Not that it's our business.
It all remains to be seen. I mean, it could be part of, you know, if the school needs assessment isn't gonna cost $300,000, I don't think. So if there's monies left over, we would look at potentially applying it to any of those other items. I think as Robert said, Mass Development would probably foot the bill for the, you know, the building assessments and the
But as you
parking
said,
analysis.
this committee has closed the door
Mhm.
on that, so let's move on. Okay, under new business, draft RFP next steps, that's basically looking for a way to fund it.
Yep.
So Robert will bring back some information at our next meeting.
Mhm.
And I hopefully will have some information as well. Okay, moving right along under new business, the Community One-Stop Growth application discussion, I guess what I had in mind, did I say?
You just had it.
Just
No, I know that. That was under old business.
Yeah, but we mentioned new stuff under the old stuff. so,
We shouldn't be allowed to do that, but
Okay.
no, what what I like, to suggest maybe as some kind of a communication between this committee and the now non-existent working group is that they report back periodically on the progress. The whole community got very much involved in this plan, and as often happens, it just goes dark and nobody knows whether
Didn't we have a member on that?
Susan Mary and Robert and I served in a couple of committees.
No, but I'm
But-
saying, didn't we have a member on that committee?
Yes, except that the committee is
Housing working group is defunct.
gone.
Right, but we had one. It was what I'm saying.
Yeah.
and We weren't getting necessarily
Right.
reports, even though we had one of our members on the committee.
Right.
No, we were getting reports. I was on it. Victor did participate in the final ones. We gave a report every meeting.
Yeah.
Brian,
I'm thinking of something else.
Brian Hildebrandt was on it. We discussed it every meeting,
Right,
yes.
so,
But I
got
understand your point. It's
Separate subjects are.
what's happening with the implementation of the
Exactly.
report and keeping the commission apprised or the committee apprised. And, you know, I'm still involved, Robert's involved, Brian's involved. We'll continue to provide updates.
Mr. Chair, Bill Marshall.
Bill, go ahead.
In relation to this working group, the 4 points that we just talked about that we could use for the grant were part of that report and recommendation. Will we be going at cross purposes with some other group that's doing the same thing? Because those 4 points are for the housing and zoning changes, aren't they?
We're talking about this, the schools, the planning, the building assessment, the community outreach, traffic and parking.
Yeah,
Well, I think it seems to me the coordination for that now is not with us, because we've
Right.
walked away
This
from the
committee
grant.
has nothing to do with those 4 items.
Right.
In that report. I think, Mr. Marshall, Victor is suggesting getting updates from the people who are working on that to the DJFC, not the DJFC being involved in it.
well, we're going to use that grant to do one of those 4 things. So, but somebody else is doing it too.
So
No,
we are not using any of those grant funds,
No,
right?
so Mr. Chair, just to clarify, Bill, so there's these 4 issues that came out of the working group, right? The schools is gonna be one of them, but the responsible party for the schools, because the local expertise will be Air, Shirley, Harvard, the DEC, and the superintendents. And we will use some of that money from the grant for that effort. Then the
Okay,
other
so-
3, and then the other 3 areas have yet to be assigned, I believe, and we'll find out.
All right, so we're assigning that money to that particular purpose, but the jurisdiction committee isn't going to be responsible for it.
Right.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Chair, if I may, the jurisdiction committee isn't responsible for it, nor are they have the authority to direct the funds. The funds are not with the Devens Jurisdictional
Right.
Framework Committee. The funds were granted to the town of Air and the Devens Enterprise Commission. So it's good that we're all in agreement with what's going on, but this committee does not have any authority to redirect funds that they've already rejected. So just to be clear.
And if there was any confusion about that, our communications with EOHLC are clear, that that's not our charge.
Yep.
Okay.
All right, wouldn't mass development be part of that particular process? Since it's not jurisdiction, it's the housing and caps and zoning.
Yeah, I would say mass development is the key player going forward.
Okay, so are they, so where, I guess I'm saying is, mass development is responsible for providing some funding, and we're now giving somebody a grant, correct?
Yeah, it's not coming from us, but we've released any obligation to, on the, to. to
I just
bring
don't,
those to us.
I just don't want somebody to be working at cross purposes with another group.
No, I don't think so. And mass development's aware of what, what is being contemplated by the town of Air, the town of Shirley, the town of Harvard, to do this school needs assessment. And it won't be duplicating efforts by any means.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, What-
Mr. Chair, can I ask one more follow-up?
sure.
So my understanding, and I'm the one who asked the question at the working group meeting, is what's next, right? And the only concrete thing I heard happening was the monies that we had declined that were then going to get reallocated to this school study that AIR was ultimately going to be in charge of, was the only concrete thing of the recommendations that actually had some pathway forward. Are there other actions being taken to address the other three avenues? Other three items?
Yeah, I believe the idea is to look at how much a regional school needs assessment would cost, determine how much funding is left over,
Gotcha.
and what of the other three items can we accomplish with any of that remaining funding?
And who's the who
And
doing it?
who's doing it? That's when we're,
That's
you know,
TBD.
that's all TBD.
Okay, so that's one bucket of activity. Another is a preparation for super town meeting,
Yes.
right? Another is mass development has a green light to develop housing on the land that's already zoned for housing. So presumably things are happening there. So what I'm suggesting is there are lots of things related to housing that are being spun off of this report. And it would be good if quarterly somebody provided a report publicly on what progress has been made. And I should think, rather than just drop it, rather than just say, in next month, mass development will be meeting with all the towns to discuss super town meeting. So it at least put down in paper exactly what's happening, some kind of an update for the benefit of all those who contributed to the working group.
Probably
If
you're the
that's-
one who's gonna be more clued into anything happening than we are.
Quite possibly, but I think that's another potential good opportunity to engage mass development
Okay.
and request them to come back to the table and give us. If they're not gonna come back to the table to participate, will they, something we might want to add to the letter, will they come back for a quarterly update to let us know what's going on at Devens? Or some other way to have them come back to the table in some manner. Could be an option.
Okay, it's an early stage, so I wouldn't want to interfere with that letter. But wait, what if we wait?
See the response.
Wait to see their
And
response.
They're at the table, it's a lot easier.
Right, so some progress has been made, some period of time, in a couple of months from now, communicate with mass development, asking them specifically for an update on
Yep.
progress that's been made with respect to the recommendations of the working group. So we'll move that to old business and keep it going.
Yep.
Okay, under new business, Devens Housing Working Group final, this is what we just talked about. Okay. Question 14, taxation.
Mr. Chair, if I may, I have to run to another meeting.
Okay.
Pretty late for actually. Would I be able to go first?
Yes. Well, yes.
Put us under the
You may.
quorum so we can keep talking.
Well, we're not voting on anything
That's true.
anyway, right?
Right.
So, but my apologies, I did get double booked. So for the Devens Enterprise Commission status quo, I just outlined section 21 of chapter 498, which talks about the authority for actually both Devens Enterprise Commission and Mass Development to collect taxes. in Devens. We have an agreement with Mass Development, instead of having two tax rates or two entities collecting taxes, that we take a share of their taxes. I think we mentioned this last time. We get 2% of Mass Development's taxes to help fund our operations, which, isn't a significant amount because we're mostly self-sustaining with our permitting fees. But Mass Development does collect the taxes. The current tax rate is $12.55 for residential and $17.27 for commercial industrial. That's per $1,000. And it's important to note that this rate doesn't include personal property tax. So it's a significant benefit to businesses locating in Devens. They're not taxed on all their equipment and materials inside their buildings. So another kind of incentive, I think. So just something to be aware of as how things operate right now. Mass Development did miss excise tax. They do collect excise taxes for vehicles on Devens. So that's, I think, important to mention too. That's it. And I know there's no representatives from the Devens committee here, but I did offer to give an quick overview of their submission to it. Okay.
Yes, very good.
So they would continue to contract. They propose, if Devens became its own community, they would continue to contract with an assessor, perform annual assessments. They would make sure there's proper positions, tax collector, treasurer, and finance director be hired to fulfill the concept and organization reviewed under the DJFC #1 administration submission, and basically do all the functions associated with taxation. They would honor any existing TIF or pilot agreements that remain in place for any of the businesses on Devens. And they would work with other departments to determine an appropriate tax rate and how that would be levied. And what else? They would continue to maintain a separate residential and industrial commercial split, so a split tax base as we currently have. And they would continue to collect excise and hotel lodging taxes, which we currently do as well too. Utility taxes would be separately addressed. They also noted that they would have exemptions for accessibility issues, people with accessibility or handicap issues, as well as tax deferrals for any qualifying entities. That's it for the. So I missed anything? The feeling that you might have written most of that.
Okay, Neil, very good.
Okay.
You are
Thank you.
dismissed.
I'm sorry I have to
Oh,
run, but thank you.
Have a good
Yeah.
one.
Good to see you all.
Take care.
Take care, Neil.
Shirley,
Yes, currently, town of Shirley maintains a single tax rate. The majority of that, those taxes are residential property taxes, it's roughly about 90%. If we were to assume historic boundaries of Shirley, we would kind of have to take an inventory and assess that land, and obviously the property on it. I think it would be a slightly unique scenario, based on kind of what's currently there and the possibility of what could be there. It's a smaller portion of Devens, currently has mainly municipal buildings, Shirley Town offices, the town library, police station, of course, our regional middle school. Probably the main property of note would be the wastewater treatment plant. I think as that's owned by a quasi-government agency, ideally we would try and work out a payment in lieu of taxes. also we'd have to take a look at, by the time, if the historic boundaries did go back to the towns, if any development had occurred since then, we'd have to evaluate that. Or if there was potential growth in any of that, would we ever reconsider having perhaps going to a split tax rate?
We have one rate now.
Correct, yeah.
What is that rate now?
FY25 was $12.97 per thousand. I want to say it went down slightly for FY26 to 12. I don't know, it's 12.64 or whatever, exactly whatever it was.
So the pilot for the wastewater treatment plant, that could be a considerable source of revenue, actually. It's just prorated by users. Yeah. Okay, very good. Who's up next? Harvard, okay. Taxation from Harvard. Just to point out that assessments would not change under any scenario, because I believe all three towns, as well as Devens, use the same company to assess properties, so that would not change. Now, we would, I just wanted to, in the submission from Harvard, we indicate how property is assessed between a net municipal budget and valuation. And I just thought that was important to include in there, because every once in a while, somebody brings up the notion of taking revenues from Devens and using it for other purposes. And under any circumstance, whether Devens becomes a town or goes back to the towns, that's not possible. That the valuation, the tax on property is a function of a budget and assessed value. You can't, unlike the way it's done now, you can't arbitrarily set a tax rate. You needs to be grounded in a net operating budget that's approved by the Department of Revenue. And that's not the case the way it is currently. The provisions of Proposition 2.5 would come into play. I think there's some question of whether or not it is applicable to Devens presently. And I suspect that Devens would, because of the substantial amount of new growth every year, that if they need to raise revenue, they don't exceed the limitations of Proposition 2.5. And I'm not really sure how you would override taxes on Devens, because there is no town meeting to do that. And there is no, and people on Devens don't vote on Devens, they vote in the town. So how could you conduct an override on Devens presently?
Is the point though to write this from the point of view that if Harvard resumed jurisdiction?
There would be a proposition. Well, at that point in time, the new growth may not be a factor, and Proposition 2.5 would come into play.
Right, so it just was, the reading of this is not necessarily, if we resume jurisdiction, here's the steps that we would take sort of thing. That's where I was a little confused. So I think you'd have to figure out what the level is of taxation, right? Because it's not necessarily in correlation to the assessments, right? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, that the assessed values would get added in all three towns. The assessed values would get added to the current assessed value in the town, and the operating costs of Devens would get added to the town budget. That would be used to develop a tax rate.
Okay.
Harvard does not presently have a split rate. And that could be problematic, because although Harvard doesn't have a great deal of industrial property, it does have commercial farming, and it could have an impact. So that in the future, that would need to be studied. Once there is real concrete numbers with respect to a budget, we'd have to see what kind of a tax rate is generated by that. And a decision would have to be made as to whether or not the split rate or classification, as it's officially known, would continue. So that remains an open question at Harvard. Okay, air.
Mr. Chair, in the event of a disposition scenario in which air resumed its historic jurisdictional boundaries, the town of Air currently has a split tax rate. Residential currently is $12.42, and the CIP, commercial, industrial, personal property, is $27.45. The tax rate process, the town of Air has a 3-member elected board of assessors that is supported by a professional assessor and a full-time admin support. As you mentioned, all 3 towns currently have the same consultant on assessment. The Board of Assessors make a recommendation to the Select Board each year that set the tax rate, including the shift factor, which is always a big point of discussion as to how much of the burden to shift, whether towards residential or commercial, industrial. We would contemplate doing some type of professional property assessment analysis prior to assuming jurisdiction of the historic boundaries to fully understand the whole issue. In terms of staffing, we don't believe currently there would be any change, again, to our current staffing in the assessor's office or the tax collector's office, but something we would want to look at. Some other considerations that the town of Air has, the town of Air does have a local meals tax. It'd be anticipated that that would extend to any applicable entities on Devens that came under Air's jurisdiction. The town of Air also does have a local cannabis tax, as we have 2 establishments in town. I don't believe there's any on Devens currently. We're also a Community Preservation Act community with a 3% CPA with the state match. We'd have to look at this as well as far as applying over there. We would need to develop a plan to address any existing tax incremental finance pilots and special tax agreements that are currently in place with businesses on Devens, and it needs to be an appropriate plan in place. And so I think 2 of the broadest themes to consider would be obviously a plan for transition, as you mentioned, and then an issue of equity. And on that issue, I think, like Neil hit one of the things, the fact that the businesses up there don't pay any personal property tax on any of that equipment and so forth. For example, in Air, that is, taxed, creating that equity. So
Is that a significant source of revenue from here?
the biggest piece of it is the commercial industrial. The personal property is a factor, but if we just applied, I'll oversimplify, but if we applied Air's current taxation to existing Devens, the personal property, for example, I can only imagine like at Bristol Myers Squibb, all of that equipment. I mean, that is a huge benefit that the status quo those businesses have on Devens right now is the fact that they are not taxed on any of the equipment. I mean, that's huge.
I thought all manufacturing
Well,
equipment was exempt from personal property tax in Massachusetts.
some of the manufacturing is, but the devil's always the detail. And Devens Enterprise Zone has the unique advantage of there's no personal property tax. So it's a fascinating issue.
What's the difference between personal property tax and the auto tax, the excise tax on automobiles then,
Yeah, so the excise tax is a separate tax on,
than personal property?
yes. The personal property is on certain business equipment. And as Victor is correct, in Massachusetts, manufacturing equipment is often exempt.
Right.
Right? The devil is in the details, meaning the definition and so forth. Other business equipment on an industrial commercial level can be subject to what they call personal property tax.
Okay, yeah, I'm familiar with.
For
the form.
most, small businesses, it's the computers, the copy
Yeah.
machine, things of that sort, desks.
Shares.
And so you're saying that the commercial business on Devens does not pay anything for
Correct,
any of their business capital things?
correct.
Okay, thanks.
Okay. All right, moving right along, new business, meetings, summer meeting scheduling. What did we do last year?
Last year, we didn't have any meetings in July and August. Yeah, so I think your bigger problem right now would be the July. July 4th is on a Friday, obviously. And then, of course, on the 9th, July 9th is our next meeting. And you probably have a lot of people on vacation, which will also impact everybody getting even their matrix options to us and whatnot.
I mean, the only thing that I would say would be somewhat time pressing, perhaps be the approval of the letter. And so, I mean, is there a way to have a maybe quick Zoom meeting to approve the letter and not meet otherwise?
Do that before, I will be unavailable on the 9th and.
Well, I'm not saying it has to be on the 9th, perhaps even sooner.
We'd have to check everybody's schedule as far as, or I don't know, we have to check if the room's available. What if we need to meet in July? What if we moved it out to the 16th?
Is the primary reason to meet the sending of the letter, you think? And then
The sending of the letter, we can do the whole, because I mean, we're pretty much putting everything on today's agenda onto next month's agenda. So I don't know, but I mean, we have to then send out an email to everybody saying, hey, does this date work for you? So we still have to, coordinate with everybody's schedule, even to do a quick Zoom, because we got to post it.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, and of everything, as Brian mentioned, the most time-sensitive pressing issue is the letter. Not that these other things aren't important, but perhaps if we could do a brief meeting, I mean, it could be on Zoom or what have you, to get this letter done and out, and then reconvene after July, August on the other matters. But I think it's in that letter we have to get out.
I wouldn't see that we would, could we send out an email to see maybe even next week?
Yeah.
Where next Wednesday at 3, for me, for the most part, the majority of my meetings, unless they're a night meeting, are earlier in the day, usually around
Yeah, I mean, if
3.
this room next Wednesday is available at 3, or if you do it at Zoom or both, it is open.
If we're only going to talk about the letter, I would think we could just all Zoom.
Yeah.
But we need to get the email out and have everybody respond in a timely manner so that we can get it posted.
We need at least a representative from Devens,
Yeah.
right? And that was the holdup today. So if we have, as all these people here who can make it on next Wednesday, and at least one person from Devens, we can
Right.
do it.
Maybe
Yeah,
even
and we
Bill.
have to-
I would think so. Yeah,
So can everybody hear me next Wednesday at 3?
I can.
Yeah.
And we would need the absolute latest post it would be by 3 p.m. on Monday, but we
Okay.
could get posted sooner.
I was trying to get the
Yeah.
agenda posted.
So the agenda would only be, just the
Just
letter.
just that.
30 minutes if we want to do.
Yeah.
I can have Logan, or I can change the.
I have the Word document. I'll fix it.
Okay.
Yeah, and we can resubmit. All right, so let's ask everybody, send out an email asking everybody to respond as quickly as possible as to being able to meet for the sole purposes of, we can do the meeting minutes, because we might as well, if we're gonna Zoom in, we might as well add something, make it worth our while. And then, the letter.
ask people to respond by end of day on Thursday, because then you can post Friday.
Now, should I characterize this as a brief meeting? We'll only deal with
Yeah.
that.
Yep.
I would just explain there was no Devens representative at today's meeting. We would like to do a short meeting on Wednesday at 3 p.m. for the purpose of simply approving the minutes and the letter.
And if we
Okay.
add in, like, if we do this, then you get July 9th off. So,
So how should we handle the meeting schedule for July and August?
well, right now, I think we're talking about not having the July 9th. I think is what we're
Yeah.
talking about, because we want it, if we could meet, August, I have a conflict, so.
We just do September as our next meeting.
Yeah. We can always, I mean, if something comes up, we send out an email going, hey, something's come up. Can anybody meet on such and such day? As long as we've got enough time to post an agenda and everything like that, we're good.
Yeah.
So,
Okay, let me just throw something out there, and I'm prepared to accept the fact that nobody else may think this is a good idea, but, so we take 2 months off.
we did last year.
Yeah, but we keep to the schedule on the matrix. And we prepare the next 2 submissions, 3 submissions.
They be prepared to present them in
Because you
September.
got, while you're sitting on the beach, you think, about it.
There you go.
Okay?
Yeah. Try.
That's the bad news. The good news is there's no meeting, so.
Back then complete, I mean, we're
Yeah,
pretty far
pretty-
along on.
I
We don't
guess-
have that many left.
No.
Let me see. Hold on. I'll tell you how many we got left. What happened here? Hold on. We don't have many left. So we're doing community identity next. Then we have utilities, regional services, boundaries, redevelopment authority, and I don't know what other is.
Okay.
I think community identity is gonna be, well, that one's next week. Yeah, our next formal meeting. I think that one, to me, I think would be the toughest one,
What do we?
and utilities is kind of,
What do you mean, or what's the intent of when we say community identity? How would Devens assimilate to the towns, or how would the towns assimilate to Devens and become
Well, I
one
think
community?
it was put on the list by the folks from Devens, because what concern they have historically had is to preserve the identity of the Devens residential community.
I think if, for example, if it was to go back to the historical boundaries, they could become a village of.
Okay, so I guess that is the answer to how would the towns deal with the desire, if you will, of Devens to retain its community identity.
Town surely doesn't have villages, but we identify as, Center Shirley, we identify as the village. Many towns that have, official villages,
And
So I mean, I think-
unofficial evolved neighborhoods.
Still River.
Sure. So I guess that would be how it would be addressed. I mean, Devens would state what they've stated in the past about retaining their identity under any circumstance, and then the towns would be asked, well, how would you facilitate Devens retaining its character? That's how I would suggest. And utilities, how I think we kind of talked about that a little bit. And what's the third one?
Regional service.
Regional services.
I could think we could put it on there going, hey, if everybody can have this stuff done for the September meeting. I think the no if, ands, or buts about it should at least be community identity and utilities, and then let's see if we can squeeze in regional services too. That's just my realistic
Yep.
view of it.
In the creation of the matrix, was there a word about what these did? Like, we just
No.
revisited?
No. That was why we're supposed to come up with the blurbs.
What it is? Okay.
Oh, All right, so you're gonna send out an email to everybody?
Yep, I sent, an email, announcing a Zoom only meeting next Wednesday at 3, specifically to deal with the issue of a letter to mass development. Do we want to throw in the minutes?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Good to
Okay,
get
all
it
right.
out, because otherwise
right.
we're.
Yeah.
Okay, so there's the
It's that
forum,
way
the
it's-
minutes, and the letter and adjourn. That's it.
Yeah.
Okay,
And put in your email going, hey, this is to avoid the July 9th and no August.
okay. And I'll get it out today. Okay, public comment. We're good? Is there a motion to adjourn?
Hang on.
Oh,
We've got the items for the next meeting agenda, which would be for the next regularly scheduled meeting agenda, would be community identity, utilities, regional services, contingency plan to submit grants.
Yeah, and then update on grant funding sources.
Update grant funding sources.
Can I ask a quick question? Is, the RFP, and you put it in as new, I'm assuming it went through rounds of vetting, so I'm not gonna ask, but, to bring it back, but is there an ability to amend something in the RFP before it goes out? Okay. Not at all, however.
it is a draft.
Okay,
So, yeah.
all right.
Yeah.
A recommendation for something, so I can bring that at another meeting.
Okay. Are we ready to consider a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Seconded.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed say nay. Without objection, the motion passes unanimously. We are adjourned.